Hey everyone, welcome once again to Black Clock Audio Tales. This is a special episode. This is Dave's Corner of the Unibierce. Dave from Dave's Corner of the Universe, who helps us out on our People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos episodes, is helping us out again with a Black Clock Audio Tales special about Ambrose Bierce. Again, this is brought to you by BunnySlippers.com, and yeah, check out our stuff on threadless.pgttcm.com or pgttcm.threadless.com. Look for it in the show notes and check out all of our cool, fun stuff everywhere that we've got. You can find us at People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos and Black Clock Audio Tales on the Facebook, on the Instagrams, and if you go on the webs, you can find us at pgttcm.com, and that's where you will find everything. All right, thank you again so much. Thank you for listening. Rate, review, subscribe everywhere that they do the podcasts. Apple and iTunes changed everything around, so hey, we're a little bit harder to find, I think. I don't know yet. You tell me. All right, you're the best. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you later. Okay, bye.
My name is David Heath, and I run a blog called Dave's Corner of the Universe. About 10 or 12 years ago, I was living in Southern California, and I got a call from my parents. They were watching Jeopardy, and the final answer was, this man wrote The Strange Occurrence at Owl Creek. Now, I'm not sure why my parents couldn't wait until after the commercial to get the answer, but they didn't want to wait. They called me up because they knew Dave would know the answer. Of course I did. The question is, who is Ambrose Bierce? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Who is Ambrose Bierce? Now, we're doing this as a two-part project with Black Clock Radio. The first part, which you're listening to right now, who was Ambrose Bierce, the living, once-breathing human being that walked the earth? The second part is, who is Ambrose Bierce, the author? How did he influence literature? What were his stories about? And that will appear as a parallel post in Dave's Corner of the Universe. Now, I realize on this show there will be others who will be exploring Bierce, so I've kind of limited what I'm going to talk about. That, and I've only got 10-15 minutes or so. As such, we are going to cover the tip of the iceberg. As I have not coordinated with any of the other guests, I do not know if this is going to be a repeat about Bierce or if this will be unique points. So Ambrose Bierce was the 10th child of a family of 13 children, all of whom first name started with the letter A. The Bierce family is going to be staunch abolitionists, not just in the, hey, slavery is bad type way. His uncle literally smuggled guns to the violent abolitionist John Brown. So this family definitely opposed slavery. This ideology is going to inspire Bierce to join the North Side during the Civil War. Like so many other veterans, his experiences, what he saw during the war, is going to be the driving force for the rest of his life. His abolitionist leanings are also going to drive his other career as a reporter. So at 15, he is going to work as an apprentice at an abolitionist paper. This is going to start his newspaper and writing career. He is going to suffer a serious head wound at the Battle of Rich Mountain. He is going to suffer a traumatic brain injury as well as PTSD centuries before these terms are going to be coined. This is going to have major effects on his life, but also on his writing. If we think that, many creative geniuses are shaped and molded by their emotional and mental instability, such as Lovecraft being an emotionally abused child, Robert E. Howard's depression, Clark Ashton Smith's autism, or Philip K. Dick's schizophrenia. We can also see that as a writer and as a human being, Bierce is going to carry these spiritual, emotional, psychological wounds as well as the physical wounds right up to the day he disappeared. I am unaware of many first-hand accounts by Bierce of how he felt. We're going to talk about what he wrote about the war, but dealing with his experiences and emotions. So some of what I'm going to talk about now, I'm going to extrapolate from experiences of people I know, and also how the effects had on Bierce's life. The Civil War was a bloody, violent, upfront, in-your-face conflict, which had terrible emotional effects on the survivors during a time that was not understood, and they were told to basically deal with it. There is a solid connection between what happened to Bierce after the Civil War and what happened to American servicemen and women from Vietnam after. Now, though, fortunately, we have some understanding, we have some empathy towards our veterans, that though the Civil War veterans were put on a pedestal, their psychological wounds were not understood at the time. When we talk about war and the corruption of the government during Bierce's lifetime and the villainizing of the press, again, there's obviously parallels to today. And if there's anyone who's listening to this who is or was a family member or has a family member who is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, my heart goes out to you. And though I discuss the dark parts of Bierce's life and how he dealt with it, veterans now do not have to suffer the way he did. And in the companion piece, which I will write for my blog, I will include at the end phone numbers for veteran support groups and suicide prevention lines, because there are so many options that exist now that did not exist to Bierce. And I believe we see events that are happening into his life are going to creep in from his war experience. He is going to get divorced. He has 3 children, 2 sons, both of whom are going to pass away before he disappears. One son, Day, is going to commit suicide, the breakup of a romantic relationship, and his other son, Lay, will die of alcohol-related pneumonia. Though I have no evidence of the correlation of these tragedies and the effect of the war on Ambrose Bierce, to me it's nearly self-evident that there is a connection. Maybe they would have happened if he hadn't been in the war. Maybe there was ways that he could have stopped them, or events that had nothing to do with the emotional scars that Bierce would bring to his family. But to me, I believe that there is a correlation and a connection. What Bierce had that other veterans did not was access to a national audience. And a lot of what he experienced, and to me his most horrific writing, can be seen in his true life account of What I Saw of Shiloh. This covers 2 days of the war with some of the most horrific things that Bierce would write, including bodies being eaten by pigs, walking over bodies. And this is going to set the stage for Bierce's macabre fiction writing that was to come. And I can't imagine that in some ways this was cathartic for Bierce. In the same way that Ian Fleming was suggested by his therapist that he write down some of his most violent, sort of misogynist tendencies and thoughts, and they became the James Bond books. We have Bierce dealing with the death that he saw, the destruction he saw. And it goes, as he continues on, becomes more and more fantastic, more and more weird in the tradition of weird fiction writing, more horrific in not necessarily horrible, but horrific as in having to do with what we now consider horror fiction. In a way, Bierce becomes the voice piece for this voiceless generation of veterans, in the same way Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage is going to be a voice piece for him. Bierce's voice, though, is going to be much more bizarre and fantastic, but he definitely does write some very realistic descriptions of the war, as we see in What I Saw of Shiloh. After the war, he becomes a writer, a fiction writer, but also a reporter. And he is going to have this Bernstein and Woodward moment when after the completion of the Transcontinental Railway, the robber barons who own the railways are basically going to try to pass laws to get $130 million worth of loans given by the U.S. government forgiven. Now, I didn't adjust that amount because of time. This was $130 million in 1896, or roughly about $4 billion today. And according to the story as he would tell it later, one of the corrupt politicians would meet him on the steps of Congress and basically ask, how much do I have to pay you for you to kill this story? And Ambrose Bierce replied, $130 million, and if I'm out of town, please make the check out to my good friend, the Secretary of the Treasury. Now, it probably didn't happen that way with those words, but that story cemented Bierce as this investigative journalist and hero of the people. Unfortunately, Bierce is going to go from this hero, the little guy, crusading journalist, to persona non grata. And it's going to be because of a poem. He's going to write this poem about the assassination of Governor William Goebel. And in this, he's basically going to say President McKinley is going to be next. A year later, McKinley is assassinated. And instead of being viewed almost as this psychic visionary, Bierce is seen as instigating or causing the death of McKinley. Now, there's no evidence that I could see that would be a correlation between that poem and the actual shooting of McKinley. But he and his name and his brand at the time is going to be linked to causing McKinley's death. Now, his editor at the time is William Randolph Hearst, and Hearst is not going to be the good guy in a lot of stories. He is, however, going to back up Bierce and support his employee, which is usually we see Hearst as the bad guy in these type of stories. Now, we cannot discuss Bierce without discussing his disappearance. But just in the same way that John Lennon and Sharon Tate are much more than their deaths, Bierce is much more than his mysterious disappearance. I knew about Bierce's disappearance first, before I had read any of his stories. I must have been in about the 6th, 7th grade, and I got this Scholastic school book. It had like 3 science fiction stories, and one was about this organization that would take people to live on another planet, and saying that, that they set their first operation up, where Bierce had disappeared, and that Bierce was one of their first people to go to this other world. So even if I warn against, the Bierce story being just about his disappearance, it's a huge factor. He basically got some money to basically travel to his old battle sites that he had fought, and then said that he was going to go to Mexico to observe the Mexican Revolution. And I think it's almost impossible for us to understand just how violent and how the area, especially northern Mexico, was just torn apart by these different competing bands, and how all-encompassing the Mexican Revolution was at this time. And he was going to go and he was going to find and try to interview Pancho Villa. So what happened to Bierce in Mexico? The answer is we don't know. We do know that he gave up basically his burial plot before he left, telling his daughter that he wouldn't need it. He had other plans. He did write some letters that made it almost seem like he had planned or almost had a vision that he would be killed by Pancho Villa's firing squad. But the truth is, we don't know. All the stories that we have are just that, stories with no physical evidence. Some people feel that he committed suicide. There's no evidence that he ever made it to Mexico, other than stories told decades later by people who may have had a vested interest in it. There's no evidence he didn't make it to Mexico, though. Some people think that he might have committed suicide at his beloved Grand Canyon. The story that originally got out is that he joined, the revolution, and he fought and was killed in battlefield. But remember, Bierce was 71. He had suffered from not only his wounds, but asthma. It's really doubtful that he was a major combatant in anything in Mexico, if he made it. Although I love this idea of this 71-year-old badass leading, the cause of the revolution and going out in this blaze of glory. But it's not realistic. There are stories of a man who had a name similar to his dying that area of tuberculosis. That's a possibility. And it is also possible that maybe he did find Villa. Maybe Villa did kill him by a firing squad. We just do not know. With all of his strange and sort of weird fiction, though, I would love to think that Ambrose Bierce either met his fate and by an invisible monster like his creature in the story of the damn thing, or that he somehow escaped the earth and found another dimension. Although the truth is, we'll never know. My name is David Heath, and like I said, I write Dave's Corner of the Universe. And if this is something that you've enjoyed but want to know more about who Bierce was as a writer, please visit my blog,